Hey guys, tonight we dive into something that will either fascinate you or send you into the most peaceful sleep you've had in weeks. We're exploring the absolutely bizarre world of medieval medicine, where doctors thought bleeding you half to death was a cure and where the most dangerous person in town might just be the one trying to heal you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture this. You wake up in the year 1347 with a splitting headache, a fever, and what feels like the worst flu of your life. In our modern world, you'd pop some aspirin, drink fluids, and maybe see a doctor if things got worse. But in medieval Europe, seeking medical help meant entering a world so strange, so utterly backwards, that the cure was often deadlier than the disease itself. Medieval doctors didn't just lack our modern understanding of medicine. They operated under beliefs so fundamentally wrong that their treatments read like horror stories, written by someone who'd never seen the inside of a human body. Yet these weren't cruel or stupid people. They were working with the best knowledge available to them. Knowledge that happened to be spectacularly, dangerously incorrect. The foundation of medieval medicine rested on the ancient Greek theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Every illness, every ailment, every sneeze was attributed to an imbalance of these four bodily fluids. Too much blood made you hot and aggressive. Too much phlegm made you cold and sluggish. Yellow bile caused fever and irritation. Black bile brought on melancholy and depression. This wasn't just medical theory, it was cosmic law. Medieval doctors believed these humours corresponded to the four elements, the four seasons, even the four temperaments of human personality. Your health was literally written in the stars, determined by when you were born and which celestial bodies governed your particular combination of fluids. When you fell ill, the solution seemed obvious to medieval minds. Restore the balance. Remove the excess humour causing your problems. And this is where things got medieval in the worst possible way. Bloodletting became the go-to treatment for almost everything. Headache? Let's drain some blood. Fever? More bloodletting. Broken bone? Definitely need to balance those humours with a good bleeding session. The logic was simple and completely wrong. Too much blood was making you sick, so removing blood would make you better. Medieval doctors developed an entire arsenal of bloodletting techniques. They used sharp knives called phlemes to open veins. They applied heated cups to the skin to draw blood to the surface. But perhaps most memorably, they employed leeches. Lots and lots of leeches. These weren't just any leeches. Medieval medicine distinguished between different types, each supposedly suited for different ailments. The medicinal leech, Hirudo medicinalis, became so valuable that leech farming turned into a legitimate profession. Imagine explaining that career choice at a medieval dinner party. The process was as disturbing as it sounds. Leeches would be applied to specific parts of the body based on which humour needed balancing. They'd attach with their 3 rows of teeth, each containing up to 100 tiny razors, and begin their feast. A single leech could consume up to 5 times its body weight in blood, swelling up like a grotesque balloon. But leeches were just the beginning. Medieval doctors also practiced cupping, a technique that involved heating glass or ceramic cups and placing them on the skin. As the air inside cooled, it created suction, drawing blood to the surface and often raising painful blisters. The theory was that this would draw out the bad humours, but in reality, it just created wounds that often became infected. For more serious cases, doctors performed venesection, the deliberate opening of major veins. They had charts showing which veins to cut based on your symptoms. your astrological sign, and the phase of the moon. Getting sick during the wrong lunar phase could literally determine which part of your body got sliced open. The amount of blood removed was staggering by modern standards. Medieval texts recommend draining anywhere from a few ounces to several pints, depending on the patient's constitution and the severity of their humour imbalance. Many patients undoubtedly died, not from their original illness, but from the shock and blood loss of their treatment. If bloodletting seems extreme, wait until you hear about medieval surgery. Performed without anesthesia, antiseptics, or even a basic understanding of anatomy, surgical procedures were acts of desperate faith rather than medical science. Medieval surgeons, often barbers who doubled as medical practitioners, learned their craft through trial and error. They had no concept of sterile technique. They reused instruments without cleaning them. They operated in dirty environments, often in the patient's own home, surrounded by family members, livestock, and whatever bacteria happened to be floating through the medieval air. Pain management consisted of getting the patient very drunk or having them bite down on a leather strap. Some fortunate souls might receive mandrake root or opium-based concoctions, but these were rare and expensive luxuries. Most medieval patients simply had to endure unimaginable agony while conscious surgeons sawed through bone and muscle with tools that looked more like torture devices than medical instruments. The mortality rate for medieval surgery was catastrophic. Even minor procedures carried enormous risk. A simple tooth extraction could lead to infection and death. Amputation, often performed for injuries that modern medicine could easily treat, was essentially a death sentence that took several agonizing days to carry out. Yet perhaps the most disturbing aspect of medieval surgery wasn't the pain or the death rate, it was the complete randomness of the procedures. Surgeons would drill holes in skulls to release evil spirits. They'd remove healthy organs based on astrological calculations. They'd perform unnecessary amputations because they believed certain body parts were cursed or possessed. Medieval dental care deserves special mention in this catalogue of medical horrors. Toothaches were attributed to tiny worms living inside the teeth. The cure involved applying heated metal instruments to burn out these imaginary parasites, often destroying the tooth and surrounding tissue in the process. For patients lucky enough to keep their teeth, medieval dentists offered cleaning services that involved scraping with rough metal tools and rinsing with solutions that included urine, vinegar, and various acidic compounds. These treatments often stripped away tooth enamel and caused more damage than the original problem. But the creativity of medieval medicine extended far beyond bleeding and surgery. Doctors developed elaborate theories about disease transmission that led to treatments so bizarre they seem like dark comedy rather than medical practice. They believed that diseases could be transmitted through bad air or miasma. This led to the practice of carrying aromatic herbs or flowers to ward off illness. While this might sound harmless, it often prevented people from taking actual protective measures during plague outbreaks. Medieval doctors also believed in the doctrine of signatures, the idea that plants and substances that resembled diseased body parts could cure those ailments. Yellow flowers were used to treat jaundice. Red substances were applied to bleeding wounds. Walnuts, which supposedly resembled brains, were prescribed for head injuries. This magical thinking extended to the use of precious stones and metals in medicine. Doctors prescribed powdered pearls for melancholy, ground emeralds for eye problems, and gold leaf for heart conditions. These expensive treatments did nothing except enrich the physicians and impoverish their patients. Perhaps most disturbing was medieval medicine's approach to mental illness. Conditions we now understand as depression, anxiety, or psychosis were attributed to demonic possession, moral failing, or extreme humor imbalances. Treatments included exorcism, beating, confinement in chains, and procedures designed to shock patients back to sanity. The medieval medical profession operated without oversight, standardization, or any meaningful way to distinguish effective treatments from dangerous quackery. Anyone could claim to be a doctor simply by declaring themselves one. There were no medical schools as we understand them today, no licensing boards, no standardized training. Medical knowledge was passed down through oral tradition, copied manuscripts filled with errors, and personal experimentation on unfortunate patients. This lack of regulation created a medical marketplace filled with charlatans, frauds, and well-meaning practitioners whose treatments were indistinguishable from torture. Traveling physicians moved from town to town, leaving trails of dead and maimed patients in their wake, always managing to stay one step ahead of their reputation. The tools of medieval medicine looked like implements of war rather than healing. Bone saws resembled weapons designed for dismemberment. Cauterizing irons glowed red hot as they seared flesh to stop bleeding. Trepanation kits, used to drill holes in skulls, came complete with various sized bits for different depths of penetration into the brain. Medieval doctors also employed a stunning array of animal-based remedies that pushed the boundaries of both logic and human decency. Unicorn horn, believed to neutralize poison, commanded astronomical prices despite being narwhal tusk or rhinoceros horn. Powdered mummy, yes, actual ground-up Egyptian mummies, was prescribed for everything from headaches to heart problems. Physicians recommended eating specific animals to cure corresponding ailments. Patients with lung problems were fed ground fox lungs. Those suffering from eye diseases consumed roasted bat eyes. Heart conditions called for eating actual hearts, preferably from young, healthy animals. The medieval obsession with bodily fluids extended beyond the four humours to include virtually every liquid the human body could produce. Urine wasn't just examined for diagnostic purposes, it was consumed as medicine. Fresh morning urine was believed to cure stomach ailments when drunk warm. Aged urine, fermented for months, supposedly treated skin conditions when applied topically. Even more disturbing was the medieval medical use of human excrement. Fresh feces were applied to wounds as a healing salve. Dried powdered human and waste was mixed into drinks to treat various internal disorders. The logic behind these treatments remains incomprehensible even by medieval standards. Medieval gynecology deserves particular attention for its combination of ignorance, superstition, and outright cruelty. Doctors believed women's reproductive systems were fundamentally different from men's, not just anatomically, but spiritually and mentally. This led to treatments that were both medically useless and deeply traumatic. Childbirth was managed by midwives who operated under beliefs that seemed designed to maximize both mother and child. They dangerfully believed that prolonged labor was babies' reluct caused by the ants to enter a sinful world, so they would shake, jostle, and manipulate pregnant women in ways that often caused serious internal injuries. Medieval doctors treated feminine ailments with procedures that bordered on ritualistic abuse. They prescribed fumigations involving burning aromatic substances near the patient's reproductive organs. They recommended bizarre internal applications of herbs, metals, and animal products that frequently caused infections and internal damage. The medieval understanding of anatomy was so fundamentally flawed that doctors routinely confused basic organ functions. They believed the heart was the center of intelligence and emotion, while the brain simply cooled the blood. The liver was thought to produce blood, which then flowed to the heart where it was imbued with life force before circulating through the body. This anatomical confusion led to treatments that targeted completely wrong organs for specific ailments. Heart problems were treated with head remedies. Digestive issues were addressed through procedures focused on the extremities. Mental disorders were treated by manipulating organs that had no connection to brain function. Medieval medical education, such as it was, relied heavily on ancient texts that had been copied and recopied for centuries, accumulating errors and mistranslations along the way. Students learned medicine by memorizing these flawed manuscripts rather than through direct observation or experimentation. The few medical schools that existed taught students to debate theoretical points about humor balancing rather than how to actually examine patients or recognize symptoms. A medieval medical graduate could engage in lengthy philosophical discussions about the nature of disease, while being completely unable to distinguish between a broken bone and a muscle strain. Perhaps most tragically, medieval medicine actively discouraged innovation and questioning of established practices. Any physician who suggested that traditional treatments might be ineffective or harmful risked being labeled a heretic or fraud. This created a medical culture that was not only wrong, but aggressively resistant to correction. The economic incentives of medieval medicine also worked against patient welfare. Doctors were paid based on the complexity and duration of treatment rather than successful outcomes. This encouraged physicians to prescribe elaborate, expensive, and prolonged treatments rather than simple remedies that might actually work. Wealthy patients received the most dangerous treatments because they could afford multiple procedures and exotic ingredients. Poor patients, ironically, often had better survival rates because they could only afford basic remedies like rest bowl teas. The unsimple and medieval medical approach to epidemics reveals the full horror of their misunderstanding. When plague struck European cities, doctors responded with treatments that likely accelerated the spread of disease. They prescribed group bloodletting sessions, where multiple patients shared the same infected instruments. They recommended communal bathing in solutions that became breeding grounds for bacteria. Medieval physicians also believed diseases could that epidemic BC treatment assured through mass applied to entire populations. They would prescribe citywide fumigations involving burning toxic substances that poisoned the air. They recommended dietary restrictions that weakened people's immune systems just when they needed strength most. The psychological impact of medieval medical treatment may have been as damaging as the physical procedures. Patients lived in constant fear, not just of their illnesses, but of their doctors. Seeking medical help meant submitting to procedures that were guaranteed to be painful and quite possibly fatal. This medical trauma extended to families and communities who watched loved ones suffer through treatments that seemed designed more to punish than heal. The medieval sick room became a place of horror where hope gradually died along with the patient. Yet perhaps the most chilling aspect of medieval medicine was how confident its practitioners were in their methods. Medieval doctors weren't hesitant or experimental. They were absolutely certain that their treatments worked, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. This confidence made them incredibly dangerous because they never questioned their own methods or sought alternatives. Medieval medical texts are filled with detailed instructions delivered in authoritative tones, as if the authors were describing proven scientific facts rather than deadly superstitions. Reading these documents today feels like discovering the confident delusions of an entire civilization. The training that medieval doctors received was so fundamentally flawed that it's almost impressive how systematically wrong they managed to be. Medical students spent years memorizing texts written by ancient Greek and Roman physicians who had never performed a proper dissection or understood basic human anatomy. These classical authorities, particularly Galen, had based their anatomical knowledge on dissections of pigs and monkeys, then applied those findings to human patients with predictably disastrous results. Medieval medical schools, when they existed at all, focused almost entirely on theoretical debate rather than practical application. Students would spend months arguing about whether yellow bile was naturally hot or cold, while never actually examining a living patient. They memorized elaborate charts showing which veins to cut during different phases of the moon, but couldn't recognize the symptoms of common infections. The few dissections that medieval medical schools performed were ritualized affairs that reinforced rather than corrected existing errors. A professor would read from ancient texts, while a barber surgeon did the actual cutting, and students were expected to see what the books described, rather than what was actually in front of them. When the anatomy didn't match the classical descriptions, which happened constantly, they concluded that human bodies had degenerated since ancient times rather than questioning their sources. This educational system produced doctors who were supreme, that killed them confident in treatments to more patients than they saved. They graduated believing they possessed secret knowledge about the fundamental nature of disease and healing, when in reality, they were armed with nothing but elaborate superstitions and dangerous procedures. Medieval pharmacology deserves special mention in this catalogue of medical horrors. Medieval doctors developed an enormous catalogue of remedies that ranged from merely useless to actively poisonous. They prescribed mercury for virtually everything, not understanding that mercury poisoning causes symptoms far worse than most diseases. Patients treated with mercury compounds often suffered permanent brain damage, kidney failure, and death by toxic metal accumulation. Lead-based medicines were equally popular and equally deadly. Medieval physicians mixed lead compounds into drinks and salves, believing the heavy metal would restore balance to disturbed humors. Instead, they induced lead poisoning that caused abdominal pain, muscle weakness, brain damage, and eventual death. The symptoms of the lead poisoning were then treated with more lead-based remedies in a cycle that guaranteed patient deterioration. Medieval doctors also prescribed remedies containing arsenic, believing this poison could purify corrupted humors. Arsenic treatments caused hair loss, severe digestive problems, skin lesions, and organ failure. When patients developed these symptoms, doctors interpreted them as signs that the treatment was working and increased the dosage. The medieval approach to wound care reveals their complete ignorance of infection and healing. Instead of cleaning wounds and protecting them from contamination, medieval doctors applied poultices made from animal dung, rotting meat, and fermented plants. They believed that wounds needed to develop pus in order to heal properly, so they deliberately introduced infectious material to encourage suppuration. Medieval physicians had an entire theory about different types of pus and what each variety indicated about the healing process. They distinguished between laudable pus, which was supposedly beneficial, and malignant pus, which indicated divine punishment for sin. This led to treatments where doctors would manipulate wounds to produce the right kind of pus, often causing severe infections that killed patients who might otherwise have recovered. The medieval understanding of contagion was so backwards that their preventive measures often spread disease rather than containing it. They believed illness was transmitted through bad smells, so they created elaborate aromatic preparations that required close contact between sick and healthy people. They recommended sharing meals and sleeping arrangements with infected patients, thinking that good humors could be transmitted along with bad ones. During plague outbreaks, medieval doctors advised communities to gather in large groups for mass treatments and prayer sessions. They believed collective healing was more powerful than individual care, so they packed infected and healthy people together in poorly ventilated spaces where diseases spread rapidly through the crowd. Medieval surgical procedures extended far beyond the bloodletting and amputations we've already discussed. Doctors performed eye surgeries using needles and knives to remove cataracts, often blinding patients permanently in the process. They attempted brain surgery by drilling holes in skulls to release pressure, usually causing fatal infections or brain damage. Medieval dentists didn't just extract teeth with crude tools. They performed elaborate procedures involving acid applications, metal insertions, and surgical reshaping of jawbones. They believed tooth alignment affected the balanced break of facial laws, so they would unhummed reset healthy jaws to achieve what they considered proper symmetry. The medieval treatment of bone fractures involved procedures that seemed designed to ensure permanent disability. Instead of setting bones properly and allowing them to heal naturally, doctors would repeatedly break and reset fractures until they achieved what they believed was the correct spiritual alignment. This often resulted in deformed limbs, chronic pain, and lifelong disability for patients whose original injuries might have healed completely with proper care. Medieval obstetrics was perhaps the most dangerous branch of their medical practice. Doctors believed that difficult childbirth was caused by moral failings in the mother, so they prescribed treatments that were essentially punishments. They would bind women in uncomfortable positions, force them to consume nauseating medicines, and perform procedures designed to cause additional pain rather than ease labor. Medieval physicians also practiced surgical procedures on pregnant women that would be considered barbaric today. They performed cesarean sections on living women without anesthesia or proper surgical techniques, usually killing both mother and child. They believed these procedures were necessary to save souls rather than lives. So the death of the patients was considered acceptable if the baby could be baptized before dying. The economic structure of medieval medicine created incentives that worked directly against patient welfare. Doctors were paid more for complex treatments than simple ones, so they had financial motivation to prescribe elaborate procedures even when basic remedies might work better. They charged separately for each component of treatment, encouraging them to break simple problems into multiple expensive procedures. Wealthy patients became trapped in cycles of increasingly expensive and dangerous treatments as doctors competed to provide the most exotic and elaborate care. Poor patients were often refused treatment entirely, but they frequently had better survival rates because they couldn't afford the deadly procedures that killed their wealthier neighbors. The medieval medical profession operated without any meaningful quality control or accountability. Doctors who killed patient after patient with their treatments faced no professional consequences as long as they followed established procedures. Success was measured by adherence to traditional methods rather than patient outcomes, creating a system where the most dangerous practitioners were often the most respected. Medieval medical records, when they exist at all, focus on the complexity and expense of treatments rather than whether patients actually recovered. Doctors wrote detailed accounts of their elaborate procedures while barely mentioning whether their patients lived or died. This suggests a profession more interested in demonstrating theoretical knowledge than achieving practical results. The psychological torture of medieval medical treatment extended beyond the physical procedures to include spiritual and emotional abuse. Doctors told patients that their illnesses were punishment for sins, creating guilt and despair that hindered recovery. They prescribed confessions and religious penances as medical treatments, turning sickness into opportunities for moral judgment. Medieval physicians also used their position to exploit patients financially and sexually. They demanded payment in advance for treatments they knew were likely to fail. They required access to patients' bodies for procedures that had no medical justification but satisfied the doctor's curiosity or perverse interests. The combination of physical agony, financial exploitation, spiritual abuse, and ultimate medical failure made seeking treatment in medieval times an act of desperation rather than hope. Patients faced the choice between certain suffering from their disease or probable death from their doctor's cure, with no real prospect of actual healing from either option. Yet medieval doctors remained supremely confident in their methods, interpreting treatment failures as evidence of patient moral failings rather than medical inadequacy. This confidence made them incredibly dangerous because they never questioned their own assumptions or sought to improve their techniques through observation and experimentation. The medieval medical establishment's approach to mental illness reveals perhaps their most disturbing combination of ignorance and cruelty. Conditions we now recognize as depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and other psychological disorders were universally attributed to demonic possession, moral corruption, or extreme imbalances of the black bile humor that supposedly controlled melancholy and madness. Medieval doctors developed an entire classification system for different types of insanity, each requiring increasingly brutal treatments. Melancholia was treated by inducing vomiting through toxic plant extracts, believing this would purge the excess black bile from the system. Manic episodes were addressed through prolonged bloodletting sessions that left patients so weak they couldn't maintain their agitated behavior. For patients experiencing hallucinations or delusions, medieval physicians prescribed trepanation the practice of drilling holes directly into the skull to release the evil spirits trapped inside the brain. These procedures were performed with crude metal bits while the patient was fully conscious, held down by assistants as the doctor bored through bone and into brain tissue. Most patients died from infection or brain damage within days of the procedure. Medieval treatment of what we now understand as epilepsy was particularly horrifying. Doctors believed seizures were caused by demons entering and exiting the body through various openings. Their solution involved sealing these openings through surgical procedures that mutilated patients' faces, ears, and other body parts. When seizures continued, despite these mutilations, doctors concluded the demons were more powerful than initially suspected and escalated to more extreme measures. The medieval medical approach to childhood diseases was equally devastating. Children were considered miniature adults with the same humour imbalances, so they received proportionally scaled versions of adult treatments. Infant bloodletting was performed using tiny instruments designed specifically for small veins. Newborn babies were subjected to purging treatments that dehydrated them so severely that death often followed within hours. Medieval pediatric includes surgery procedures that seem designed more for torture than healing. Doctors performed operations to correct perceived spiritual deformities in children, believing that physical abnormalities reflected moral corruption that could be surgically removed. These operations typically killed or permanently disabled children whose only crime was being born different. And there you have it. Medieval medicine in all its backward, blood-soaked glory. A world where the cure was genuinely worse than the disease, where doctors operated with supreme confidence in methods that killed more patients than they saved. From mercury poisoning disguised as treatment to surgical procedures performed without the slightest understanding of human anatomy, medieval physicians created a system of healing that was really just elaborate torture with a medical license. The next time you visit a modern doctor, remember that you're not just getting medical care, you're experiencing centuries of hard-won knowledge that our ancestors paid for with their lives. Sweet dreams, and may your sleep be filled with gratitude for antibiotics, anesthesia, and doctors who actually understand what they're doing.